Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 10 Part 87 based on novel. So let's start. The desolation had begun to spread at a frightening rate on the desert below. After which, the originally dark black land began to turn withered yellow in color. Clearly, when Lindong executed the Great Desolation scripture now, it was no longer merely for the purpose of absorbing the energy across the surface of the land. Instead, he was able to reach deep beneath the ground, before he drew all the energy within the land, just like a whale sucking on water. A rich scent of desolation spread from deep beneath the ground, before it finally spread 30,000 miles away. If one looked from above, it seemed as though the entire desert was affected. The land trembled continuously while waves of energy were being emitted. Finally, they gathered together and flowed towards Lindong. Meanwhile, everyone could detect just how frightening the energy contained within was. Lindong stared at this scene before he gently exhaled. However, his dark black eyes remained as calm as still water. Soon after, he gave a faint smile. This is not enough. Although the area of effect had nearly reached its limits, this was not the most terrifying aspect of the Great Desolation scripture. Desolation does not seek to forcefully strip away all life. In fact, seeds of hope would always remain within desolation. Moreover, when spring arrives, the hidden seeds would burst forth and the place would become livelier than before. Desolation can lead to rebirth. This brief comprehension began to spread within Lindong's heart. After which, every expert around suddenly realized that the wild and violent energy coursing through the ground had suddenly become much gentler. Next, they promptly realized that emerald green spots had appeared on the withered yellow land. In fact, they were tiny sprouts and they began to grow at an alarming rate, before the entire place was covered with grass. In less than 10 breaths, this massive desert had actually turned into an endless grassland. Meanwhile, a rich life force spread. Please lend me all your strength once again. Lindong lowered his head before he looked at the endless grass plains and quietly muttered to himself. After which, the grass plains became barren once again. Following which, a frightening stream of energy began to converge with the terrifying energy that Lindong had obtained previously. Rumble. The land beneath where Lindong stood began to collapse at this moment. Countless glimmering liquid broke out from beneath the ground before they quickly surged upwards. These liquid was created after the energy was agglomerated and compressed till its limits. In fact, they were so mighty and powerful that they would even secretly frighten a peak reincarnation stage expert. Splash! The liquid began to rise at an increasingly rapid pace. In the end, they transformed into 100,000 feet tall green water pillar, which shot out from the ground. Meanwhile, Lindong stood at the top of this water pillar. Lindong had a grave expression on his face. Meanwhile, his arms began to liquefy. After which, he cupped his hands together before a huge bow slowly formed in his hands. However, this time around, that huge bow looked old and rustic. In fact, there was no light flowing on its surface. Nonetheless, it was still possible to detect an extremely frightening fluctuation radiating from it. Lindong used his liquidized hand to slowly draw the bowstring. Following which, a clear and sharp screech echoed across the world. Then, the 100,000 feet tall energy water pillar seemingly rose like a water dragon, before it finally transformed into an emerald green arrow and sat on the bowstring. Next, 3 ancestral symbols rose from Lindong's palm. They entwined around each other before they flew into his arrow. The color of the arrow immediately became a brilliant and dazzling one. Following which, a divine light was emitted from between Lindong's brows. Immediately, the mental energy within his divine palace also gushed forth before they charged into the arrow. Roar! Then, a few 100,000 purple gold dragon-like tattoos whizzed out before they drilled into the arrow. Warm white light also shot out before they transformed into an ancient symbol. Following which, the ancestor stone shook before waves of warm and pure energy gushed into the arrow. The great desolate tablet and mysterious divine palace closely followed behind. Soon after waves of energy began to pour into the arrow. Crack! The space around Lindong began to shatter continuously. Soon after, his hand, which was holding onto the bow, began to erupt continuously. If not for the fact that both his arms had transformed into ancestral symbol hands, it was likely that they would have been forcefully blown apart by that frightening energy. This arrow basically contained every power that Lindong could summon. In fact, even the corner of the ancient master's eyes twitched when they detected this fluctuation. At a short distance away from Lindong, Ling Qingzhu was sitting in midair. Meanwhile, there was no yuan power fluctuation around her body. Instead, only ultimate experts at Lindong's level could vaguely detect that in response to the probes and calls in her heart, a mysterious power was slowly descending into this world. Ling Qingzhu slowly lifted her jade-like hand before she gently clenched it. Immediately, the space in front of her cracked before a 1,000-feet-long sharp green sword slowly materialized. Flowing on the surface of this long sword was power that originated from the mysterious zenith, which left one both in awe and in fear. At the same time, the Life-Death Master, Flame Master, and the rest had also unleashed their full strength. Instantly, many terrifying forces were gathered in the sky. In fact, it was likely that no one present would dare to claim that he could block this attack. This was an attack that was made up of the most powerful attacks from every top expert in the world. Although there was no longer a legendary man like the symbol ancestor who could shoulder the burden on his own, at the very least, when everyone in the world put their hearts together and unite their forces, the power that they unleashed was something that could not be underestimated. Bang bang. Meanwhile, the Devil Emperor Avatar seemed to have detected the frightening attacks being formed in this world. Immediately, he began to struggle at an increasingly intense pace. The huge dragon-like ice vines, which were entwined and binding him, were quickly broken. Ying Huan clenched her silver teeth tightly. Meanwhile, crystal-clear light continuously flowed within her pretty eyes as she pushed herself to her limits. After all, she knew that she must not allow the Devil Emperor Avatar to break free at this moment. However, it was clear that the Devil Emperor Avatar was more powerful than Ying Huan. Hence, even though she was giving it everything she had, with the passage of time, she began to feel increasingly powerless. I will not allow you to go over. Ying Huan stared at the Devil Emperor Avatar, who was struggling so violently that the surrounding space was shattered. Meanwhile, her voice was filled with unquestionable determination and an icy cold chill. Following which, she gently bit the tip of her tongue, before a stream of bright red essence blood spurted out. They lingered amidst the cold aura before they instantly transformed into an enormous blood-red ice dragon. Finally, that ice dragon entwined around the Devil Avatar's legs and firmly tied him down. After executing this attack, Ying Huan's face became increasingly pale. Clearly, this attack took quite a toll on her. Fortunately, her attack, which was launched in order to delay him, had achieved its critical objective. This was because by the time the Devil Avatar shattered the blood-red ice dragon, the countless attacks in the sky were already well prepared and ready to be unleashed. Ying Huan looked at the countless experts standing in the sky behind her. At this moment, all of them had excited and maniacal expressions on their faces. Although they knew that they were at the most precarious moment, at times like this, being able to rely on one's strength to protect the things that one cared about would strengthen one's will and resolve instead. This time around, teacher is no longer around. Let us protect the world by ourselves. Ying Huan stood up from her ice lotus, before she tilted her head gently. After which, she used her crystal-like pretty eyes to look at a skinny figure standing right in front. Following which, an emotion, which had never appeared in her heart before, rose within her heart. In the past, protecting the world was merely a duty that I had to complete. However, right now, there is someone in this world that I want to protect from the bottom of my heart. Therefore, I cannot allow this world to be destroyed in your hands. Her icy cold lips gently lifted into an extremely faint arc. Following which, Ying Huan lifted her hand, before a crystal quickly gathered on the tip of her finger. Then, it swelled rapidly before it transformed into a massive ice lotus in a short moment. Meanwhile, there were faint traces of blood hovering within the ice lotus. Moreover, strange heartbeat sounds were actually being emitted from within. Go? A gentle voice was emitted from Ying Huan's lips. After which, the ice lotus took the lead and rushed forward. Bang! The world seemingly began to collapse after her voice sounded. Behind her, countless all-out attacks streaked across the sky like meteorites. Together with a deafening rumbling sound, they whizzed across the sky before they smashed down towards the Devil Emperor avatar from all directions. At this moment, Ling Qingzhu gently pressed her finger against the empty air. Immediately, a huge sword, which was formed by the mysterious zenith, shot forward before it headed straight towards the Devil Emperor avatar with lightning-like speed. Roar! Little Flame unleashed a furious earth-shaking roar. Then, a purple gold fist, which looked just like a fearsome tiger which could devour the heavens, charged forward. Following which, 100,000 feet large crescent shot out from Little Martin's hand. The Life-Death Master, Flame Master, and the rest also released explosive cries. Their attacks, which had been brewed to their limits, tore through the sky before they swept forward in a grand and mighty fashion. Charge! In the sky, an ancient sound seemingly sounded within the ancient universe formation. Following which, the ancient formation rotated violently, before a massive, ancient-looking hand, which nearly covered the entire desert, extended from within. Then, it shattered through the void before it ruthlessly slammed onto the Devil Emperor avatar. When he heard the battle cries that echoed across the sky, Lindong's heart, which was pounding wildly initially, began to calm down. Then, he stared at the Devil Emperor avatar solemnly, which was filled with destructive force. Finally, he slowly released the tightly drawn bowstring in his hand. Bang! Just like a pebble falling into a pool of water, circular ripples spread immediately. Lindong's liquidized hand suddenly exploded, before that ancient-looking arrow trembled and flew forward. It neither possessed frightening speed nor did it contain terrifying force. In fact, its quivering flight path caused one to question whether it could hit its target. However, amongst all the frightening all-out attacks in the sky, this ordinary-looking arrow was actually the most eye-catching one. Everywhere that arrow passed, all the other attacks would quietly move aside in order to open up a path that would allow it to head straight for the Devil Emperor avatar. The arrow eventually caught up with the Ice Lotus, which was right at the front. After which, a sword whistled from behind, before a 1,000-feet-long sharp green sword appeared beside them. Finally, accompanied by the frightening attacks behind them, they rained down on the Devil Emperor avatar's enormous body. The color of the sky changed at this moment. Countless dazzling attacks flew across the sky like meteorites. Finally, they landed on the incomparably huge Devil Emperor avatar. At that very moment, it was as if the entire world had collapsed. Boom boom. Terrifying energy ripples frantically spread outwards in a circular manner. The area within 100 miles instantly crumbled at this moment, while waves of sand below towered over 100,000 feet as they rose and crashed. The position of the entire western Xian region desert had been forcefully shifted. The Alliance army was also turned into an extremely miserable state. Countless experts were sent flying, and the original battle formation had completely disappeared. However, everyone ignored this. It was no longer possible to simply use numbers to make up for power on something as powerful as the Devil Emperor avatar. Ying Huanhuan, Lindong, and the others in the sky had also been pushed back thousands of feet by the incomparably wild and violent energy ripples. Some of the reincarnation stage peak experts involuntarily spat out a mouthful of blood. This scene was indeed rather spectacular. However, all of them did not concern themselves with such matters at this point in time. Their eyes were focused intently on the middle of the desert. The wild and violent energy there had caused space itself to become distorted, and no one could clearly discern the situation inside. The distortions lasted for a dozen minutes, before the yellow sand that permeated the sky gradually disappeared. Countless pairs of eyes also shot over at this moment. Space gradually recovered, and a huge and seemingly endless demonic figure slowly appeared, before growing increasingly clear. The Devil Emperor avatar stood between the sky and earth. It was just like a destroyer from another plane. How is it fine? Countless shocked exclamations suddenly erupted in the sky when they clearly saw it. The experts within the Alliance army were terrified as they looked at the completely unharmed Devil Emperor avatar. Even their faces had turned ashen. The strongest attack, which combined the powers of everyone here, was actually unable to damage the Devil Emperor avatar? How is this possible? Little Flame exclaimed. Although the Devil Emperor avatar was frightening, it should not be possible for it to ignore their attacks. Lindong narrowed his eyes and stared intently at the Devil Emperor avatar. He quickly shook his head. Those attacks have indeed been forcibly absorbed by it. However, that does not mean that they did not do any damage to it. Crack. A faint cracking sound appeared after Lindong's voice sounded. After which, everyone saw a tiny crack appear on the titanic body of the Devil Emperor avatar. Crack crack. A chain effect seemed to have been created the moment this crack appeared. Countless cracks surfaced on the Devil Emperor avatar and ultimately covered almost half of its body. Berserk-like rays of destruction shot out from these cracks. Everyone could feel the frightening energy gathered within the body of the Devil Emperor avatar. However, such energy was clearly not something that the Devil Emperor avatar could endure. Have we won? The countless Alliance army experts were stunned as they watched this scene. Their eyes still appeared a little dazed. They should have won given this situation, no? The Devil Emperor avatar was currently just like a bomb, and no longer able to attack. Lindong frowned slightly as he watched this scene. This Devil Emperor avatar seemed to have intentionally absorbed all of their attacks into its body. By doing this, however, the energy within its body had soared to a frightening level. Even the Heaven Seat King was no longer able to control it. Such an action was obviously suicidal. However, was the Heaven Seat King really so foolish? Does he intend to take us along with him? Ling Qingzhu arrived beside Lindong and softly said. Once energy of that level exploded, it was likely that half of the Western Xian region would be annihilated. Practically none of those present would be able to survive. Lindong's eyes flashed upon hearing this, and his heart became rather grave. If this was really the case, they would really suffer serious deaths and losses. Lindong, you and I should prepare our spatial power. The spatial master looked over and said in a deep voice. He had also clearly thought of this possibility. There was already no time for everyone to flee. Only the two of them could protect some people while escaping. Nevertheless, this was also fairly limited. After all, even if the both of them were to work together, it would be impossible to instantly teleport so many people here out of the Western Xian region. As such, there would still be terrible losses. They just did not have any other options at this point in time. Lindong nodded as he sighed softly in his heart. All he could do was to try his best. Ying Huanhuan stood at the front. Her pretty crystal-like eyes stared at the crack-covered Devil Emperor avatar that appeared as though it was the most frightening bomb, as her crescent moon-like eyebrows faintly furrowed. A feeling of unease rose in her heart. Heaven Seat King, is this your final trump card? I have already stated earlier that I will eliminate all of you from this world, and let peace return. It will be worthwhile regardless of greater price we have to pay. In this state, you have ultimately lost. Ha ha. A deep laughter was once again emitted from within the Devil Emperor avatar after Ying Huanhuan's voice sounded. The laughter appeared a little crazy, while it also contained some fanatical long-awaited anticipation. Light flickered between the brows of the demonic avatar as the figure of the Heaven Seat King slowly appeared. Half of his body had reached out. He was in a mess as he looked at Ying Huanhuan's group, but the smile on his face was rather strange. Ice Master, do you really believe that you have already won? What else can you do? I'm afraid that the current you will self-destruction if you move even a little. Ying Huanhuan stated in an indifferent voice. Ha ha, that's right, there is indeed nothing much that I can do now. The Heaven Seat King laughed. Due to the symbol ancestor sealing the crack between the planes back then, we, the Yimo, that remained on this plane, have been trapped in here like prisoners. From the very beginning, I knew that we would ultimately lose if this continued for a long time. After all, this place is your home territory. Therefore, there is only one way to turn around such a situation. The pupils of Ying Huanhuan, Lindong, and the others shrunk slightly, as the unease in their hearts grew even greater. That is, the expression on the face of the Heaven Seat King had become extremely heated and excited as he lifted his head. Those eyes of his seemed to have penetrated the heavens, destroying the seal between the planes, and allow my tribe to truly enter this world. The seal was created from Master igniting his reincarnation. Forget about you, even the Yimo Emperor cannot destroy it. You must be daydreaming if you really plan to break it. The Life-Death Master laughed coldly. You are right. It is impossible for just us alone to even loosen the seal between the planes. Therefore, I needed to borrow your strength. The Heaven Seat King clicked his tongue and laughed strangely. He pointed towards the crack-covered Devil Emperor avatar. The destructive force within it caused one's scalp to turn numb. Currently, this Devil Emperor avatar has not only gathered all the power of us from Devil Prison, but also all of your own. I believe that this should be enough. The laughter of the Heaven Seat King suddenly became loud and maniacal. Aha, I have to thank all of you for this. If it not for all of you, there will be no way for us to carry out this plan. The expressions of countless individuals became ashen at this moment. They finally understood that the Heaven Seat King did not plan on having a decisive fight with them from the beginning. The Heaven Seat King's group had all along been ready to die in an attempt to borrow their power and damage the seal between the planes. Once the seal was broken, the Yimo tribe would truly be able to invade. At that time, the ancient world war would once again descend upon this land. Back then, they had the symbol ancestor to turn things around. Now, without the symbol ancestor, it was impossible for them to protect this world from the invasion of the Yimo. Even with the mental fortitude of Lindong and the ancient masters, the mere thought of this scene caused horror to flash across their eyes. Let us now observe the most spectacular scene in thousands of years. The Heaven Seat King laughed wildly. Everyone could see that the light on the enormous body of the demonic avatar became increasingly violent. It was clear that even the demonic avatar could no longer withstand this power. Ying Huan's hand abruptly clenched tightly when she saw this, as an alarming chill spread from within her body. Soon after, she shot forward. Redness surged into her crystal-like eyes as a bloody fog suddenly shot out from her body and filled the area. Great Ice World. The cold chi within the bloody fog swiftly surged out. Finally, it wrapped around the demonic avatar. One could hear cracking sounds as a blood-red ice prison that was hundreds of thousands of feet in size was formed from out of nowhere, completely engulfing the demonic avatar in the process. Many ancient symbols surfaced when the prison was formed. It activated the power of sealing to the limit. As long as they trapped this demonic avatar, this destructive force would at most lead to the destruction of the entire Western Xian region. This scenario was many times better than damaging the seal between the planes. Ha ha, are you still planning on stopping me at such a time? Ice Master, you are far too naive. However, the Heaven Seat King let out a wild laughter in response to this final resistance of Ying Huan. Subsequently, the ice prison shook. Countless demonic fists were thrown, smashing it into ice fragments that filled the entire sky. Ying Huan's pretty face turned pale. A mouthful of blood was spat out, and her delicate figure took over a dozen steps back. Her soft figure now appeared extremely weak. Ha ha. The Heaven Seat King laughed loudly. After which, the seal formed by his hand changed. Everyone could feel an annihilation-like force spurting out, as the cracks on the demonic avatar became increasingly obvious. In the end, it completely exploded in front of countless pairs of horrified eyes. Bang! This scene was as though 10,000 scorching suns were shining at the same time. The intense light engulfed the entire Western Xian region. Even the other three great Xian regions could see the light rising from the Western Xian region. Strangely, however, this destructive force was not discharged in the Western Xian region. Instead, it turned into a huge light pillar that seemed to stretch into the horizon. It dashed through the clouds, penetrating the heavens as it headed straight for the distant seal between the planes. Ha ha, that's right. I forgot to tell you something, His Majesty has already escaped from the symbol ancestor seal. Once the seal between the planes is broken, His Majesty will descend upon this world. When that time comes, all lives in this world will become slaves of my tribe. The light pillar of destruction penetrated the heavens while the final crazy laughter of the Heaven Seat King rumbled across the four Xian regions, Chaotic Demon Sea and Demon Region. Countless people lifted their heads in a dazed manner. They watched as the light pillar of destruction shot further and further away, while despair spread in their hearts. Was the former Yimo emperor going to appear again? There was still the symbol ancestor to match him during that ancient era. But now, they no longer had the symbol ancestor. How could the world possibly withstand such a frightening existence? The light pillar of destruction tore through the sky and flew into the distance. However, the entire world was still affected by the deafening rumbling voice left behind by the heaven-seat king prior to his death. Moreover, that voice was filled with excitement and brutality. In the ancient times, in order to win the Great World War, the world paid an extremely frightening price. In fact, countless top practitioners died, and the legendary symbol ancestor even had to ignite his reincarnation in order to draw a close to the war. However, was the scene from before about to be reenacted right now? Standing in the desert, numerous individuals were staring at the sky with pale-looking faces. Although they were unable to see beyond the sky, they could vaguely detect a scent filled with despair. After all, they knew that if the Yimo Emperor descended into this world, it was likely that there was no one who was able to stop him. Could it be that the countless living beings in this world would have to suffer the miserable fate of being enslaved by the Yimo tribe? Yimo Emperor, he has actually escaped from his seal. With a lost expression in their eyes, the ancient masters stared at the universe. Meanwhile, a trace of fear was actually present within their eyes. If they were only up against the devil prison, they still possessed some degree of confidence that they could exterminate their enemies. However, as of now, even their desire to fight was greatly extinguished. This was all because of two words, Yimo Emperor. After all, they have been through the earth-shaking ancient Great World War, and they clearly knew just how frightening the Yimo Emperor was. Lindong looked at the countless individuals, who had sunk into despair instantly, before he involuntarily clenched both his hands tightly. It seems like they have been played for a fool. All along, they believed that the Heaven-Seat King and his gang were their final opponents. However, the latter and his gang had no intentions of fighting against them. Instead, their plan was both maniacal and terrifying. In fact, victory will definitely be theirs if they succeed. This was because there was no one in this world who could block the footsteps of the Yimo Emperor. Everyone, there is no need to be overly worried. Even if they use all their strength, the seal between the planes was created by Teacher. Therefore, how can it be destroyed so easily? Just as the crowd sunk into despair, an icy cold voice suddenly sounded. Subsequently, everyone saw Ying Huan rub off the trace of blood on the corner of her lips, before her crystal-clear pretty eyes turned to look beyond the universe. Ying Huan formed a seal with her hands. All of a sudden, the cold aura in the sky agglomerated and transformed into a massive ice mirror. In fact, the ice mirror was crystal clear, and it looked as though both the moon and sun were traveling past it. Finally, the image on the mirror slowly darkened, as if it was reflecting a dark and empty void. Within the dark void, the crowd gradually saw a towering, seemingly endless ancient formation. That formation looked extremely obscure, and when one took a single glance, it caused one's yuan power to boil. In fact, one's yuan power nearly showed signs of going berserk. Many rays of light were stacked on top of each other, before they blocked everything behind that formation. However, the crowd was still able to vaguely spot a huge crack behind that formation. Moreover, that crack looked just like the mouth of an evil devil, and there was endless evilness sputtering out from within. However, they were all firmly blocked by the ancient formation and could not invade this world. Is this the seal between the planes left behind by the legendary symbol ancestor? Everyone looked at this mighty formation within the dark void, before they muttered to themselves. Bang! Clearly, the scene reflected within this light mirror was the scene that took place previously. Therefore, the crowd promptly saw the light pillar of destruction streak across the dark empty void before it ruthlessly smashed against the ancient formation, just like hundreds of thousands of meteorites. Even though they were at a great distance away, everyone could feel the world tremble the instant the collision took place. In fact, all the natural yuan power in the world quickly fled and scattered. The crowd was staring intently at the ancient formation. Meanwhile, they felt as though their hearts had reached their throats. This was because the seal left behind by the symbol ancestor was their final hope. In fact, if this seal was really broken, then every living being in this world was doomed. After the light pillar of destruction collided with the formation, everyone saw 100,000 feet tall energy wave sweep out from within the seal like a thunderstorm. Meanwhile, an ancient glow erupted from within the seal at this moment. That light looked extremely obscure, and they seemingly transformed into a glowing elderly figure, who was so tall that he extended beyond one's sight. Following which, that large glowing figure swiped his enormous hand, before that destructive shockwave stealthily disappeared. Teacher? When the Life-Death Masters group saw this elderly figure, they were momentarily stunned as they muttered. Soon after, many destructive shockwaves continuously swept forward. However, they were repeatedly blocked by that glowing figure. In fact, it seemed like the two of them were in a stalemate. Everyone was staring at this stalemate with their hearts in their mouths. Meanwhile, unwittingly, their hands were all drenched with cold sweat. Lindong was also staring intently at the scene reflected in the mirror, without even blinking his eyes. He had been to that place before. In the past, when he was refining the spatial ancestral symbol, he had been to that place and he had personally experienced just how frightening the seal formation was. Therefore, although the devil avatar's self-destruction was also extremely terrifying, it was likely no simple feat to break the seal. The stalemate continued for a long time. Subsequently, everyone saw that the light pillar of destruction was gradually weakening. Clearly, its strength was being slowly exhausted. Earth-shaking cheers immediately erupted in the desert. Indeed, even though the Heaven-Seat King used all his techniques, it was clearly easier said than done when it came to breaking the symbol ancestor seal. Regardless, there was no way the Heaven-Seat King could hold a candle to the symbol ancestor. Nonetheless, when Lindong heard the earth-shaking roars, he did not let his guard down. Instead, he continued to stare intently at the ice mirror. Meanwhile, as he stared at the ancient glowing light figure above the seal, an uneasy sensation suddenly surged within his heart. Why was he feeling queasy? Lindong lifted his head and looked at Ying Huan, only to see that she had clenched her jade-like hands at this moment. Meanwhile, her face was filled with a solemn icy cold expression. Bang! While Lindong was feeling uneasy in his heart, the seal between the planes, which was reflected within the mirror, suddenly trembled violently. In fact, it seemed like a blurry diabolical figure had suddenly appeared behind the seal. The seal trembled with increasing intensity. Suddenly, a tiny black ray of light shot out from behind the seal, before it ruthlessly penetrated the area between the brows of the symbol ancestor glowing figure. All of a sudden, the cheers that filled the sky came to a halt. Countless individuals stared in shock at that seemingly inconspicuous attack, while their eyes were all filled with shock. Where did that attack come from? Moreover, how did it penetrate the seal between the planes? Yimo Emperor. Ying Huan gritted her silver teeth, before icy cold aura immediately swept out from within her body. At the same time, the faces of the ancient masters had also turned pale. This was because they could detect a familiar fluctuation from that previous attack. In fact, it belonged to the Yimo Emperor. Lindong was also staring at this scene with shock in his eyes. By taking advantage of the opening created by the Heaven-Seat King, the Yimo Emperor had made his move. All along, were they planning on executing a pincer attack from both sides in order to destroy the seal between the planes? In fact, it was likely that the Heaven-Seat King knew from the start that they could not destroy the seal between the planes on their own. In fact, in order to accomplish this step, they would have to borrow the Yimo Emperor's strength. Therefore, what they did was merely to create an opening and disrupt the seal. This would subsequently allow the Yimo Emperor to take advantage of the situation and find an opening to make his move. However, how did he manage to time his attack so perfectly? When he thought of this point, Lindong's body suddenly trembled. Could it be that the Yimo Emperor was probing using his hand? In fact, could it be that thousands of years ago, when the Yimo Emperor was being sealed, he had already predicted what would happen today? Was that why he decided to rip off one of his own arms and use it as a mole in order to prepare for his comeback in the future? He was actually this intelligent and scheming? In fact, he even managed to predict what would happen thousands of years in the future? Lindong's body was trembling gently. What a terrifying foe! Yimo Emperor. Countless experts from the Alliance army looked at the ice mirror with a pale expression on their faces. At that spot, the ancient glowing figure was slowly fading away. Clearly, after it was penetrated by that tiny black ray of light, it had broken the perfect equilibrium of the seal. Lord Symbol Ancestor. Countless experts stared at the fading ancient glowing figure, before they involuntarily knelt down. Following which, roars echoed across the sky. After all, they knew that if their final line of defense was broken, the entire world would be completely exposed to the Yimo's fangs. Lindong heard the roars that echoed across the sky. Their voices were all filled with grief, fear, and despair. In fact, it felt as though doomsday was about to arrive. Standing in the sky, Ying Huan clenched her jade-like hands tightly. Meanwhile, her silver teeth were biting her red lips and there was even a trace of blood seeping out. Meanwhile, the Life-Death Masters group had completely pale faces. The ancient glowing figure became increasingly faint. However, just as he was about to disappear, emotion suddenly flashed across his hollow-looking eyes. As he turned to look at the ice mirror, a smile appeared on his elderly face. There is no need to despair. His elderly voice, which seemingly originated from far beyond the sky, reverberated through the world in a leisurely fashion. Immediately, that voice caused countless individuals to tremble, before all of them lifted their heads in shock and stared at the ice mirror. Teacher. The Life-Death Masters group also had shocked expressions on their faces. They stared at the elderly glowing figure in the ice mirror, who was about to disappear, before they suddenly knelt down. Ying Huan lifted her pretty face before she stared in shock at that glowing figure. My disciples. The Yimo Emperor might have left a hidden move in this world, but the same can be said for me. My hidden move is all of you. I believe that in the next great world war, all of you will be able to protect the things that you care about. The eyes of the light figure seemingly penetrated through space and time, before he locked his eyes on Ying Huan. Binger, when there is something in this world that you wish to protect from the bottom of your heart, that is when you shall come to possess real strength. In the past, when I saw you for the very first time, I knew that you possess such strength. This time around, we will have to rely on you. Please don't blame teacher for casting such a heavy burden on you. The ancient glowing figure gave a warm smile. After which, he vanished completely and only the incomplete seal between the planes stubbornly remained behind. Ying Huan stared at the glowing figure, who had disappeared, before some crystal-like tears rolled down her pretty face. Following which, she gently wiped them off before she seemingly smiled to herself. Teacher, you can be rest assured. Your disciple knows what has to be done. She was standing in the sky, while her long crystal-like hair danced with the wind. At this moment, she looked so heart-achingly frail. This video will end here.